Interesting. The forebrain is the highest integration center that we have of the nervous system, and is the seat of our consciousness. So that's that stuff in the forehead right here. Right here. Forehead right in here. The cerebrum consists of two hemispheres. So you got the two hemispheres. One is here, and one is up here. And in between we have this long thing going down deep, deep in the brain. It's a whole deep crevice right here. You see that again. Well, look at that. You see that right here. It goes deep down right to here, where we have those commissural fibers at the corpus callosum. And that's known as the longitudinal fissure. So a fissure is a deep, deep groove. You basically have that big one there and a few in the back of the head, or one in the back of the head. The two hemispheres in the brain are generally mirrored bilaterally, but they're dominated with different cognitive functions. That is called, we call that lateralizations. But we have to be careful. So we don't want to do too many broad labels like left logical, right creative brain tendencies, because, you know, too many generalizations, we don't want to use that stuff as excuses. However, balancing them and having a rich mental life, I think, is very important to focus on. But that, I think, has more to do with balance of relaxation and cognitive doing versus, you know, and physical doing versus focusing too much on left and right brain logic stuff. Another interesting thing is that most of the brain's impulses going down into the body, but also coming back up, they actually cross over. So they cross the brain before they reach the body, or from the body before they reach the brain. The gray matter's surface area is greatly enlarged by these convolutions here. See these little wigglies? This is actually what we see. Oops. This is what we see when we look at the brain, are these wiggle things. No, not again. There we go. The wiggles here. And then we got these little valleys, and the valleys are known as sulci. Two lateral sulci, and the central sulcus is right here on top, and the laterals were right here. These sulci, they divide the brain into 5 lobes. We got on the front here, this is the front, we got a frontal lobe, then we got 2 parietal lobes on the side, in the back we got an occipital lobe, behind the ear we got the temporal lobe, and then if we retract that down, inside we have an outer lobe, and that's known as the insula, or the insular lobe. Generally speaking, the frontal lobe deals with motor commands, conscious thinking stuff, working memory and judgment, as well as problem solving. So that's where we got that consciousness. The precentral gyrus, look at that, the precentral gyrus is in front of the central sulcus. So that's here is the central sulcus, right here where the glass stem, or whatever that thing is supposed to be. And then right in front of that here is the precentral gyrus, the first wiggle right in front of it. And that's where we have the primary motor cortex. And the primary motor cortex is responsible for executing voluntary movements. So these here, see this here? This is the wiggle. This is the precentral gyrus. And on here we actually see these body parts that they're actually laid out. They're not laid out really, but we visualize them onto, because when we actually stimulate those areas with a little knife or something, when they do that in surgery, in neurosurgery, they use plastic knife, it's that soft, all that stuff. But they then have this part that's described here is moved, goes to those muscles in that area, and then that body part moves. So that's kind of neat. And then this is a claymation thing where we see the body parts are sized to space occupied on the gyrus, which indicates how many nerves concentration we have. So look at here. Look at the back is hardly any space in comparison to the face or the tongue. And so we see how many more fine motor skills we have in those areas that have a large amount of neurons, a large neuron concentration associated with them. So that's neat, very neat, I think. Broca's areas, right here, Broca's areas, helps us make speech. And Wernicke's area, those are two very specific places. That Wernicke's area help us understand the written and the spoken language. And the Wernicke's area is actually on the next lobe, and the next lobe is the parietal lobe, and that helps us experience the world through physical sensations such as touch, temperature, and pain. It's where we experience consciously and process the meaning of the received stimuli. So all the stuff you think it's touching me or whatever, that goes to that lobe. Let's see here, primary somatosensory cortex is here. That is now on the wiggle right behind the central sulcus, and that's known as the post-central gyrus. Lots of words, huh? The gyrus refers to the wiggle. The cortex, the word cortex, refers to what's happening in there. So in there is the somatosensory cortex. So that soma means body, sensory means input. That's the stuff like touch, temperature, pain, that sort of stuff. Hoive. And this is another climation right here that shows us the amount of nerve concentration in the sensory system. I think this is kind of cool. This is where we feel the world. But you know, then I feel like I'm a little nerdy about this stuff. The parietal lobe also houses the gustatory, the cortex, and that encodes taste. Gustatory is taste. And then we also have, in the back here, we have the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe has the visual cortex in it. We'll just do a few of those. And then the primary, the temporal lobe has the primary auditory cortex in it. Also, that's going to be known as the acoustic center cortex. So acoustic and auditory interchangeable. All right. And then what's interesting here is also the way this whole thing is organized. So look at this picture down here. We have these areas, like they're called primary areas. And those are areas where we have beginning or termination of projection pathways. So we have a primary area here, that's that primary somatomotor cortex. And then behind it we have that primary somatosensory cortex in green here. And then association areas surround the primary area. And those are areas that the primary cortex, and those are areas that influence or they think about. I think of like that's where we think about what we're going to do, and then, oh, we're going to go move and turn on the light. So we have to then send stimuli to these different muscles. Same is true for the sensory. It's just the primary sensory cortex is where the information comes in, and then it goes for processing to the association areas. And then we figure out what to do about the stimuli coming in. It's like, was that a nice touch or was that a slap in the face? That kind of stuff, you know. Then we go to the insula, and the insula is deep inside. So the insula is right here, insular lobe. So we take the temporal away, and deep inside we can see the insula. See, like here, you have to go deep inside right here, and then that's the insular lobe. Right there. And that houses the vestibular cortex. And the vestibular cortex concerns ourselves with conscious awareness of balance. And I like this picture down here. See, when we look at here, inside the vestibular cortex right in here, more or less. We have balance come from the equilibrium. We also have balance coming from the eye as well. And then we have more balance coming in from actually a lot of proprioceptors inside the muscles of the neck, or also inside the joints of the neck. And then the basal ganglia is where we go next, and those are deep nuclei that regulate the extent and direction of voluntary movements, especially when we start the movement, or we stop the movement, or when it goes about the intensity of the movement. Automated movement patterns are stored here. So that's like that piano or that guitar piece that you all of a sudden remember how to play, or it's not that hard. You don't have to think about it that much anymore. That's when you know the stuff is stored in here. It's also true for the fact that at this point you can just drive in a car, much more coordinated than when you first learned to drive. This part of the brain is referred to when we say practice makes perfect. Of course, it really does mean practice makes permanent. Because whatever we learn does not, the basal ganglia does not discern if it's perfect or not perfect. It just makes it more permanent. So it's good to practice with good form, of course. It's the learning from that, right? Then we get to the next interesting connection here. In lower animals, which means evolutionarily old animals, like salamander type stuff. The cerebral cortex is very small, and mainly processes olfactory stimuli, and that's smell. And in us, even the olfactory cortex is still very, very important. It's lined in an area where we have this thing called the uncus, the uncle. And the uncus is the primary olfactory cortex. And that's where we consciously figure out different odors awareness and, get that stuff. But what's really interesting is that that connects straight to our emotional brain, which is called the limbic system. See this word? Limbic system. And that evaluates experiences based on feelings, which is the word is affective. Affect is feelings. And it triggers emotional reactions. See all that yellow stuff? That's all limbic system right there. All right there. So let's go through a few structures that are interesting in the limbic system. The one that I think is crucially interesting is the amygdala. Look at that name. Amygdala. Here. Amygdala. That's right, that red stuff right there in the center of that head thing behind the ear. And that's in the temporal lobe. That receives olfactory inputs, also pheromones, which are these body smellies that we send off that are making us attracted to one another and all that. And that's where we process those, olfactory stimuli. And then it also helps with memory creation. But what's really interesting, which is very often what takes over, is the fact that recognition of angry or fearful facial expressions is also happening there. So then we react to that. So we have a danger assessment in there and a fear response. So all that happens in the amygdala. And so this is basically, what that means is this is where we lose it. This is where we have our tantrum, or we have our amygdala hijack, a term coined by Daniel Goleman, and that's a strong emotional reaction with a rapid onset and later go like, what the heck was I thinking? Or somebody else tells you that, which is actually even worse and embarrassing very often. But that's an interesting area, and so we want to understand that area a little bit better. The other thing that happens with the amygdala, it sends the stimuli to the hypothalamus, and that then involves the autonomic nervous system as well as the endocrine system. So that's also very interesting when we then talk about psychosomatic connections, body-mind connection things.